Sukhoi Gar, everyone, and welcome to my latest Versus Series project and the beginning of the week leading up to the newest Star Wars movie that will hopefully be really good. I want to apologize for taking so long to come out with this video. I had hoped to get it out earlier, but, well, real life stuff just kept getting in the way. I would also like to announce that this is the first of a series of 8 videos that are really not connected. However, it will all be leading up to for next Friday, the 18th, when Star Wars Episode 7 will be released. However, I will not be giving any spoilers because, well, I probably won't have seen it by that point. I will be skipping the biography section for this video because that would take like an hour to cover everyone. But if you are curious, watch my 2 previous Legends of Star Wars videos, or just go on Wikipedia, either way. So, without further ado, I give you Versus Series, the Exiles and the Wounds. Revan was a human male who was well over 300 years in age at the time of his death, although his physical age was closer to 40, still putting him within the prime of his life. Revan's physical strength was considerable as a result of his Jedi training and his time spent during the Mandalorian Wars. One of the best examples of his strength was when he went up against Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat. Later he would single-handedly defeat 2 Terrantechs and dozens of Dark Jedi when he was on the planet Korriban. On top of his natural physical ability, Revan was also able to augment his physical attributes with the Force. When combined with his natural physical abilities, he was a force to be reckoned with in combat. Darth Traya was a human female who was of considerably advanced age by the time of her death and was well beyond her physical prime. Like most Force users of an advanced age, such as Count Dooku, Traya compensated for this with Force augmentation. However, this was considered a secondary consideration because of her focus on the Force. In the end, Darth Traya was primarily a scholar and an academic Force user, unlike many of her contemporaries. As a result, her physical abilities were for the most part neglected, and even with Force augmentation, she is merely a fragile old woman. Meetra Surik was a human female in her 30s or 40s at the time of her death at the hands of Lord Scourge and was well within her physical prime. Throughout her career, Surik fought against 3 of the most dangerous Force users of her time period, the Sith Triumvirate. In addition, her time fighting the Mandalorian Wars made her a dangerous opponent in any sort of combat. On at least 2 occasions, Surik fought against Darth Sion, who was a warrior of considerable skill and aggression in combat, suggesting a high level of physical endurance. Unlike many of her compatriots, Surik rarely used the Force to augment her own physical skills. Despite this, she was a formidable warrior who could use strength and strategy to win in a fight. In the end, Meetra Surik was a skilled warrior as a result of her being a veteran of one of the most deadly wars of the era. Darth Nihilus was a human male Dark Lord of the Sith who was at least 40 or 50 years old at the time of his apparent death and over 4,000 years old at the time of his last known appearance. Darth Nihilus was one of the most unusual Sith Lords in galactic history. and as a result, he had one of the more unusual physical abilities. Unlike most Sith Lords and Force users, Darth Nihilus had no physical body to speak of. His spirit was bound to and controlling his armor and mask, keeping his consciousness alive. As a result of his unusual state, Nihilus was incredibly difficult to damage in combat. This lack of a physical body made him virtually indestructible unless he could be unbound from his armor. Darth Nihilus was an unusual and unique Sith Lord for his era, and Star Wars in general, and this made him a dangerous opponent in combat. Lord Scourge was a Sith pureblood male who was well over 300 years old at the time he helped the hero of Tython fight the Sith Emperor. As a result of his species and training, Scourge was a being of considerable strength and endurance. With his training and multiple lightsaber skills that traditionally require a heavy amount of strength and endurance, Scourge was a force to be reckoned with in combat. Lord Scourge was basically an embodiment of what it meant to be Sith during the resurgent Sith Empire. He was a deadly physical tank who could take and dish out a lot of damage. Darth Sion was a human male who was at least 50 years old at the time of his death. Darth Sion's physical attributes were augmented by his unusual force abilities, making him nearly invincible in battle by being able to literally hold his body together through willpower alone. On top of this unique ability, Sion was physically strong and imposing, giving him a dangerous edge in combat. This mixed with his endurance to pain made him even more powerful than most of the Sith of his era. When you consider all these factors, Darth Sion may actually be nearly immortal, except for the removal of his head, or if he loses his concentration. This made Darth Sion a true force to be reckoned with in a duel. Okay, for the sake of practicality, the fights will be Revan vs. Darth Traya, Meetra Surik vs. Darth Nihilus, and Lord Scourge vs. Darth Sion. Because Revan and Traya are radically different in terms of age, the fact is that in terms of physicality, Revan outweighs Traya considerably. Because Revan is considerably more in his physical prime, I declare him the winner between Revan and Darth Traya. Between Meetra Surik and Darth Nihilus, we have to consider several factors. While Meetra is capable of endurance, the fact is that Nihilus is basically immune to any pain or physical harm unless he is damaged or removed from his armor. Because of this radical difference in the physical abilities of these two combatants, the decision is actually very easy to make. Darth Nihilus gains the advantage over Meetra Surik in terms of physical abilities. The hardest decision in this category to make is Lord Scourge versus Darth Sion. Both combatants are incredibly close in terms of strength and endurance. The fact is that there is really no clear winner in this category. I declare both Darth Sion and Lord Scourge equals in terms of physical ability. Now in terms of teams, this is an actual rather difficult decision to make because of Nihilus's physical edge. And as a result of Scourge's skills mixed with Revan's, I have to give this to the Exiles. Revan was a skilled duelist for his era who used his physical strength and endurance to augment his dueling abilities. While Revan's lightsaber form is not confirmed, based on his use of acrobatics in combat, it is most likely that he was a practitioner of Form 4, Ataru. The fourth form of lightsaber combat, Ataru, is characterized by precise physical strikes as well as acrobatics that are chained into lightsaber attacks. Physically, it is the most grueling of the lightsaber forms, making it tricky to use, especially in prolonged combat, and only a true master of the lightsaber and physical skills is able to use it effectively. In addition, Revan was skilled in the art of blast deflection, implying a working knowledge of Form 3 Surisu. The third form of lightsaber combat, Surisu, is a form that specializes in defense over offense, being able to outlast an opponent. It is used to counter both lightsabers and blaster attacks in order to keep the user safe. While it is true that Revan had skill in lightsaber combat, the fact that he combined Ataru and Surisu means that he would tire out easily and would have to end the battle quickly. While Darth Traya was primarily a Force user, she was skilled with several lightsaber combat forms. Traya was a practitioner of Form 1 Shi-Cho, the most basic form of lightsaber combat that all other forms were based on. Practitioners of Shi-Cho were skilled at combating multiple opponents at the same time, is usually wild and raw, making it a highly unpredictable form of combat. Traya was also a practitioner of Form 2 Makashi. Makashi was a purely fencing form of lightsaber combat, traditionally shown as elegant flourishes. It was commonly used in one-on-one combat, but true masters of the form could use it to combat multiple opponents. Traya was also practiced in Surisu in order to keep her defensive skills up in combat. Traya was also practiced in the rarely used Trakata form of combat. A rare form, it utilized the lightsaber when it was deactivated in combat. Users could use this strategy in order to confuse their opponents. However, Traya's most unique form of lightsaber combat was when she could use the Force to manipulate 3 lightsabers around her. Most of Traya's lightsaber skills were academic, as she primarily focused on using the Force in combat. She rarely fought unless she had to, because she acted more as a manipulator in order to fool her opponents into doing what she wanted. Mitra Surik's skill in lightsaber combat primarily comes from her training under several Jedi Masters, including Kreia and several others. Surik specialized in Shi-Cho, Makashi, and Surisu in order to fight her opponents. This combination allowed her to both go on the offense and the defensive in the event of battle. It also allowed her to combat multiple opponents and single opponents at the same time. In addition, she was a rare Jedi user of Dun Mulk, but she rarely used it. Primarily, she used it in her battle against Darth Sion. In the end, Mitra Surik was a skilled lightsaber duelist and combatant, and she used this to great effect against many opponents. Much like his master Darth Traya, Nihilus was primarily a Force user in combat and only used the lightsaber when necessary, or to keep the opponent occupied. As a result, his lightsaber skills were less advanced than others of his time. Nihilus's primary lightsaber form was Makashi, which he used to keep the opponent occupied in combat while he prepared to use his Force techniques in order to overwhelm them. Nihilus's use of acrobatics suggested knowledge of Form 4 Ataru and the highly aggressive Form 7 Juyo. The seventh and most aggressive form of lightsaber combat, Juyo, was primarily used by the Sith because its aggressive attacks worked well with the dark side. Nihilus combined this with the refined combat form of Makashi and his unique physiology to make himself a serious threat in combat. While Nihilus had training the lightsaber, he used it primarily as a tool while he attacked with the Force, making him a less effective lightsaber duelist than others in his era. Lord Scourge was a skilled combatant, and his skills in lightsaber combat was a result of the times and society that he lived in. Scourge combined the three lightsaber combat forms, Juyo, Ataru, and Sarisu, in order to defend against and overwhelm his opponents. Scourge was also skilled in unarmed combat, which he combined with his Force abilities to make himself even more dangerous by electrocuting his hand when he punched. In the end, Scourge's combat skills and physical abilities made him a virtual tank in combat, making him a dangerous opponent for anyone to fight. Darth Sion was a physical tank in combat as a result of his physical abilities. Sion was a specialist in Form 4 Ataru mixed with Form 7 Juyo, both of which would be physically demanding, but at the same time, the pain only increased his power. In the end, Sion's physical attributes combined with the combat skills that he chose meant that he was a force to be reckoned with in combat, making him incredibly dangerous to fight. While it is true that Treia's knowledge of lightsaber combat is primarily academic, the fact is that she matches Revan's own skills point for point, and her own knowledge of his training gives her a serious advantage. For this reason, I declare both Revan and Treia to be equals in terms of lightsaber combat. Now, as for Nihilus and Surik, the fact is that Nihilus considers lightsaber only to be a tool, and that he considers it more of an afterthought, while Mitra is a much more skilled combatant. As such, I give Surik the advantage in terms of combat ability. Scourge and Sion are a lot closer than the other opponents. The fact that they both use incredibly aggressive forms of combat means that they are basically physical tanks. However, Scourge backs it up with defensive abilities as well. As such, I give Lord Scourge the advantage in terms of combat ability. In terms of overall advantage, these two groups are actually fairly evenly matched. However, the fact that Scourge is a defense as well as an offense combatant, and Revan and Mitra's skills means that I do have to give the Exiles the edge in terms of combat ability. Revan was extraordinarily powerful in the Force, even in his youth. At the height of his power, Revan was able to channel both the light and the dark sides of the Force at the same time. Revan was able to bolster his natural physical abilities in the Force, giving him superhuman strength at times. Revan was also a master of telekinesis in combat, which he was able to use to attack opponents as well as manipulate large objects. Similarly to Treia, Revan was also capable of manipulating lightsabers through the Force using his telekinesis, and could use Force Choke to crush the internal organs of an enemy when he was a Sith. Telepathically, Revan was equally powerful, capable of influencing the minds of others and even force his will on them and steal their knowledge. His mental strength was considerable to the point that he was able to break free of the control of the Sith Emperor. Revan's skill and Force sense was also powerful to the point where he could sense the feelings of other beings and even sense the future. He also commonly had Force visions. In terms of healing, Revan was capable of using the Force to heal himself as well as resist poisons that affected his body. Revan was also capable of using Tuta Menace in a way that very few Force users could, by channeling the enemy's attacks into his body and using it as energy for his own attacks, making him a very dangerous opponent. In terms of Force ability, Revan was a skilled combatant who combined it well with his lightsaber attacks in order to make himself a serious threat in combat. Because her focus was primarily on the Force, Darth Traya had many abilities at her disposal that would make her a dangerous threat in combat. One of her most powerful abilities was Force Horror, which was a variant of the mind trick. Force Horror is used to send targets into a state of panic, which gives the user an advantage in combat and allows them to attack without any real opposition. Traya was also capable of using Force Speed, which allowed her to hit and move faster in order to avoid her opponent's attacks. She could also use Force Crush in order to destroy her opponents through telekinetic attacks. Traya could also use Force Cloak in order to hide herself in the Force and to even mask her own Force signature, making her difficult to find. Traya's other Force abilities included Energy Resistance that allowed her to resist energy-based attacks, Force Scream, which allowed her to shock her opponents, and Force Lightning. Traya could also use Force Channel, which boosted her connection to the Force. Possibly the most notable ability she had, however, was Dark Healing, which she used in order to drain Sith assassins and even Jedi Masters. Traya was also able to see shatter points and was incredibly skilled at farsight, allowing her to see almost 4,000 years into the future and see the death of Jango Fett. Traya had numerous other abilities, including breath control, and many of her abilities made her a very dangerous threat, but also allowed her to seem almost harmless at times, which made her even more dangerous. At first, Mitra Surik seemed to be less skilled in the Force. She would come to show a great skill in several Force abilities. Her most notable abilities was the ability to form bonds with others that gave her influence on them. When she later reconnected to the Force, this ability became even stronger. Surik also had the unique ability to learn Force techniques and lightsaber forms by observing their use, including some that would normally take years to learn. However, Surik was also considered to be a wound in the Force as a result of the Battle of Malachor V, which caused her to draw on the Force around her and on the life force of others, much like Darth Nihilus. Surik learned many skills from Darth Traya, including breath control and the beast trick, as well as a powerful form of telepathy that let her read the thoughts of others. Surik was also skilled with Force Valor, Force Resistance, Force Whirlwind, Battle Precognition, and Seeing Through the Force, and Force Enlightenment. While Surik didn't have as many skills as some of her contemporaries in terms of the Force, she made up with it by using what she did have with great skill. As a result of him being a wound in the Force, Darth Nihilus was a master of rather unusual Force abilities in addition to the standard ones. Nihilus's ability to drain the Force caused him to become attracted to individuals in worlds rich in the Force in order to drain them. His very presence would drain the life out of people slowly, but he could concentrate in order to speed this up. Nihilus also used a dark version of the Sever Force ability that he used on Darth Traya, however he could not use this regularly. He was also incredibly powerful in terms of telekinetic abilities, which have been used to lift entire starships, including his flagship, the Ravager. Nihilus could also use Dark Rage, Farsight, Force Lightning, Force Resistance, Force Whirlwind, and Force Scream in combat, among other abilities. However, Nihilus' most unusual ability was his ability to contain his spirit and consciousness in a vessel. This was mostly used with his armor, but he also used it with his holocron that allowed him to survive his apparent death at the hands of Mitra Surik. Because of this, Darth Nihilus was an incredibly dangerous opponent in combat. His force abilities made him almost impossible to defeat for anyone who wasn't also a wound in the force. Lord Scourge was primarily a lightsaber specialist, but he also had several force abilities at his disposal. Most notably, Scourge was capable of drawing strength from the emotions of his enemies as well as his own. Scourge could also use the Force to bolster his physical attributes and use telekinesis in order to guide a thrown lightsaber. Scourge could even discern the honesty of a target, making him a master of interrogation, and could dominate the minds of the weak-willed and undermine strong-willed individuals. Scourge also had some knowledge of Force Lightning, as he was able to use it combined with his own physical strikes. While Scourge wasn't as skilled in the Force as others, he was still a dangerous opponent with what he could use. Lord Scourge was primarily a lightsaber specialist, but he also had several force abilities at his disposal. Most notably, Scourge was capable of drawing strength from the emotions of his enemies as well as his own. Scourge could also use the Force to bolster his physical attributes and use telekinesis in order to guide a thrown lightsaber. Scourge could even discern the honesty of a target, making him a master of interrogation, and could dominate the minds of the weak-willed and undermine strong-willed individuals. Scourge also had some knowledge of Force Lightning, as he was able to use it combined with his own physical strikes. While Scourge wasn't as skilled in the Force as others, he was still a dangerous opponent with what he could use. While both Revan and Traya have many impressive skills at their disposal, the fact is that Traya was much more refined and had more of a variety of dangerous abilities that she could use in combat. As such, I give Darth Traya the edge in terms of force ability. While it is true that Mitra Surik can learn techniques and has a few abilities of her own, the fact is that it is very difficult to fight against an opponent like Darth Nihilus. And even though Surik is a wound in the Force as well, the fact is that Nihilus is a considerable threat in the Force because he has studied it and trained in it more than he has his lightsaber. As such, I give Nihilus the edge in terms of Force abilities. Both Lord Scourge and Darth Sion are fairly closely matched. While Scourge doesn't have Sion's recovery ability, he does have a strong endurance and other things that allows him to avoid taking damage. So as a result, I declare them both equals in terms of force ability. After some careful consideration, there is really only one verdict that can be reached here. The fact is that Darth Nihilus alone gives the wounds a serious advantage in any fight, so I give them the advantage in terms of force abilities. In combat, Revan used only a single lightsaber, although he may have occasionally used two. His lightsaber was of a standard design, and the lightsaber crystal changed several times over the years. Beyond this, there is nothing particularly remarkable about his weapon. Darth Traya is a bit complicated. She is traditionally seen using only a single lightsaber, but she has shown use of three lightsabers at one time. Single will be taken mostly into consideration, but all three may come into play. Traya used a standard lightsaber with a single purple crystal as a focusing lens. This was true for all of her lightsabers. Mitra Surik had a standard lightsaber like most members of the Jedi and Sith of her era, and it had a blue crystal. There was nothing truly remarkable about her weapon. Darth Nihilus had a standard lightsaber with a red crystal as the focusing lens. Other than a bulkier design, it really had no real remarkable qualities to it. Lord Scourge had a standard lightsaber with a red crystal. While it had some aesthetic changes, notably a horn, it didn't aid in combat. He also had some armor at the same time. Lord Scourge had a standard lightsaber with a red crystal. While it had some aesthetic changes, notably a horn, it didn't aid in combat. He also had some armor at the same time. This probably won't come as much of a surprise. The fact is that there is literally no difference between the lightsabers used by the various characters, except maybe some aesthetic differences. As such, I declare everyone equals in terms of equipment. I'm going to have to make a stipulation for this verdict. The fact is that while the Sith Triumvirate would be an incredible threat when put together, they do not work well together at all. As Darth Traya herself said, to be united by hatred is a fragile alliance at best. If they work together, they would win. However, they have never shown this ability, and as such, I will be considering their fights separate and not as having worked together. So the matchups will be as have already been shown in the various categories. So then, let's set the stage for our fight. In Kos City, soon after the death of Darth Nihilus, the trio of Revan, Surik, and Scourge are making their way to the Citadel where the Emperor is waiting. Before they can reach their goal, however, they are forced to face off against Traya, Nihilus, and Sion, who are standing in their way. As their battle begins, Scourge and Sion are almost evenly matched as they begin to counter each other's moves, Scourge catching each blow from the Sith Lord with his own. It is becoming apparent that Scourge is the superior combatant, even with Sion's ability to hold himself together. There seems to be very little that either of them can do to each other, however. Sion's final undoing is his own overconfidence, as Scourge manages to distract him long enough to break through his defenses and cut off the older Sith Lord's head. At the same time, Nihilus and Surik are in the middle of a heated battle. However, Surik's own status as a wound in the Force is keeping her safe from Nihilus's draining abilities. This is forcing Nihilus to fall back on his lightsaber techniques while he tries to use the Force to overcome his opponent. This means that his weakness is starting to show. After a heated battle, Nihilus's hunger and the attacks from Mitra Surik finally best him, and he falls in a heap of robes and armor and mask on the floor. But as the two victors turn, they are shocked to see Revan fall to his knees as a lightsaber stabs through his chest. Darth Traya has bested her opponent. Despite a gallant fight, Scourge falls quickly, leaving only Traya and Surik left to fight. Traya attempts to convince Surik to join her once again, but Surik refuses and goes on the offensive once more. The battle is fierce, Traya realizing that she cannot defeat her former student like she had done Revan. She is forced to combat with both her lesser Force abilities and with her lightsaber. After a long heated battle, Mitra Surik finally stands triumphant over the dead corpse of Darth Traya. Realizing that she had no chance against the Emperor now, Surik went into hiding and waited her chance to strike again. In the end, I declare the Exiles, the team of Revan, Mitra Surik, and Lord Scourge, the victors. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The Exiles and the Wound. As usual, this is only my opinion. I would hope that you don't disagree with it, but hey, it's up to you. No skin off my nose if you don't agree with me. Like I said, this is sort of a countdown to episode 7. So I will see you guys again tonight, and probably tomorrow, hopefully. So I will see you there, and may the dark side be with you always.